I know to those of you that are not aware that this is Missionary Sunday and we give out blankets, you are thinking that Ed's carrying a purse. That's not the case. Anyway, as part of the missions team, it's my privilege to be able to introduce our speaker this morning. And it's really been a joy having Mark and Nicola. I will have a hard time with that name, but anyway, the last 2 days they came in on Friday and just told them our place was a bed and breakfast, and they made it that way, and they made us feel comfortable, and I hope we made them feel comfortable. But I'm going to ask them to come up here, and I'll tell you why. Several years ago, as a church, you know that we made a concentrated effort to reach unreached people groups. And yes, we support missionaries that don't fall under that kind of banner. But right now, over the last several years, that's what has been our emphasis. And that's not to say there are not other well-meaning missionary endeavors. But our emphasis as a Bible church is to go reach the unreached people groups. Well, last year, Mark was coming through Spokane, and he looked us up on the website, and we didn't know him, and he came on a missionary Sunday and met Dr. Jerry Larson, and they built a bit of a friendship, and he asked him about what he was doing in aviation and reaching these missionaries in parts of Alaska that unbelievably no one's there for those missionaries. They're just are those tribes. So anyway, we asked him to come back, and he brought his wife, and they have a little son, Winston, that's been with them, and you'll see them a little bit later. But anyway, this is from the blanket makers, and I told you we were going to give you one. You're going to have room in your suitcase to get back. But once you unfold that so the congregation can see, this is a blanket that we give to all of our missionaries. And those of you that go through health challenges, or you're in the hospital or something else happens or whatever, the blanket makers make a blanket. And this is our gift to them to remember Valley Bible Church. And so that's our gift to you. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to let your wife say a few things, but I do want to say this: in the years that this body is here, we've seen missionary giving go from just north of 6 to just south of 50,000 a year. That's you, and I'm proud of that. What that shows is that you have a vision looking out. Life is not looking in. Well, it includes that. But it has to have a vision going out, looking at a world that needs a Savior. So, Mark, with that, I introduce you and your dear wife.
All right. Well, good morning. We're going to talk a little bit about Alaska, but first of all, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about our stories, how we got where we're at, and a little bit of who we are. For me, this verse, Isaiah 6:8, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me." And for me, that has been my life verse, and has defined everything that I do. From an early age, I had an interest in missions. My father was a church planting pastor in Taiwan. I was actually born in Taiwan. So I left there when I was 7. And so I had a context for missions. My father continued in ministry. And I was about 10 or 11 when I first felt like I wanted to be a missionary. Well, it wasn't just a few years later that it became a little more specific. It became missionary aviation. I don't know how many of you have seen The End of the Spear, the story of Jim Elliott and Nate Saint, and just their encounter in remote areas and working with remote tribes. And I never thought that people dying would be inspiring to me, but it was. It's kind of interesting how God uses those things to work in your life to say, that's what I want to be. I want to be so committed to Christ that I would give my life. So that God used that to speak into my life. And then as we were in the States, my father he was working with international students, and he would take them on field trips, and one of the places that he went was Wycliffe Jars in North Carolina. We lived about 45 minutes from there. And I would go with my dad, and we would visit there and see what it was, do Bible translation and aviation, to reach the unreached. And God really used that to impress on my heart that that's what I needed to be doing. So I looked around, what do I do? How do I get there? Looking at schools, and as I started talking to people, they said, well, you need two things. If you're going to be a missionary pilot, you got to be a pilot, but you also got to be a mechanic. Because if you're in the middle of nowhere, then and something breaks, you got to know what to do to get out. So that's what I did. I pursued both flight and maintenance at LeTourneau University in Texas. That's a Christian school. If you're at all interested in engineering or aviation in a Christian schools, it's a pretty well-known and established university. So I used that. God used that for my training, and then there's so many side stories in all of that. Just because I felt like that's where God wanted me. The problem is it's expensive. It's a private school, and you go to a private school, you end up paying a lot of money, and I knew I was going to come out with debt, but I also knew if I was going to go to the mission field, a lot of mission agencies don't want you to have any debt when you go in. So it was a big decision, but I knew that's where God wanted me. And so I went, and I came out with about $89,000 in debt, and I'll follow on that later. But and so my senior year, my roommate had been to Alaska the previous year. So my senior year, my roommate at the time was wanting me to meet this guy named Dwayne King and go to Alaska, and he was doing a training, kind of a program to help train up future pilot mechanics for missions. And Alaska wasn't really on my radar. But I looked into it, and I felt like, well, I need training. I need to understand what I'm going to be doing. And so I went, and in my mind, I was just going for a summer. I had done an internship in Virginia, and I figured when I was done with all that, I'd go back to this company in Virginia, and I'd work, and I'd get experience, because that's what I needed if I was going to be a missionary. But anyway, so I went for the summer to Alaska, and as the summer went on, I kind of felt this tug in my heart. It was like, maybe I'm supposed to be here. Maybe this isn't just a summer thing. And by the end of the summer, it was very clear that that's where God was calling me. He was calling me to Alaska. But this is a big struggle for me. I had very strong friendships and very strong family back in the Carolinas. And I really wanted to go back to Virginia because, it would be close to home. I could get all the things that I needed. I could get maintenance experience. I could get flight experience. It was perfect, right, God? And so it was just this battle. And I can remember just, staying up at night just praying, God, I know what you want me to do. But this is so much better, right? It's perfect. And finally, I just, I submitted. I said, okay, God, I trust you. I'll go where you lead, And so I made a decision. I would move back to Alaska. I didn't have anything set up, really. I had one connection with a church, but I didn't really have a job or car or anything. So I flew in and stayed with another LeTourneau student, former student. And within 2 weeks, I had a good job, and I had a car, and I had a good church home, and all those things that I saw in Virginia, God ended up providing in Alaska. So God works in mysterious ways, and He provides. If you do what He calls you to do, He provides. So I still had debt. So I knew it was going to take time to pay that off, to work through things. And so I just got a job, and I started working, but I made a point to stay involved in ministry. So I got involved with Bible camps. There's a lot of Bible camps in Alaska. And we're not talking on the road system. We're talking in the middle of nowhere. So I got involved, and I just wanted to be in ministry. And then I also got involved with some of the aviation ministries. I would work on the airplanes for them, and there was one particular organization that was just a volunteer organization, so I got involved with them and just do whatever I could. And then along the way, I reached a point where I realized that, I knew God was calling me to full-time missions, and I just wasn't sure when to take that next step. And then at one of these ministry meetings, I came across this verse in Ezekiel 33, verse 8. When I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require from your hand. But if you on your part warn a wicked man to turn from his way, and he does not turn from his way, he will die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your life. And to me, I knew what I was supposed to be doing. I knew what God was calling me to. To me, this was the call to take the next step and to go into full-time ministry. So I started pursuing that, and I started pursuing with an organization called Missionary Aviation Repair Center, or MARC, MARC for short. So if I talk about MARC, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about MARC, just to avoid any confusion. So along the way, that was my journey. That's where I was going, and then that's where I met Nicola.
And just a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Nicola. I was telling Ed this morning, it's like Nicholas without the S, if that helps you pronounce it. So anyway, I was born into a Christian family and came to know Christ at a young age. My dad was an Air Force pilot, so we moved around all over the states, but eventually we settled in Iowa, which is where most of my family is from. And from there, I went to college at Olivet Nazarene University, which is located near Chicago. And I started working on my nursing degree there. And unlike Mark, I didn't really have much exposure to missions. I had gone on a couple short-term mission trips, and my parents supported a missionary family. But otherwise, I wasn't involved directly in many missions. But it was in college that I really started to find myself having a heart towards missions, and didn't really know where to go with that. I didn't have any experience as a nurse, so I felt like maybe I should get some experience first before I go into the mission field. And so an Air Force recruiter came to the school at my junior year, and I decided, I think I'll follow in my dad's footsteps, and I'll join the Air Force as a nurse. And so my idea was I wanted them to send me wherever they wanted me. I didn't care, but they wanted me to write down on my dream sheet where it was I wanted to go. And so I just randomly put down some spots I thought I might be interested. But as the time came near for me to actually find out my assignment, I found that I had a desire to go to Alaska, which I was a city girl growing up, and I had no desire before that to go to Alaska, not even to visit necessarily. But, I told my mom, I was like, that's the only place in the world I want to go right now is to Alaska. They'll probably send me to Florida, which was my first pick. But my recruiter called me and said, you're going to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska. And I was blown away. And I told my mom, I don't think that this is going to be just a stint with the Air Force where I go and then leave and come back to the lower 48. I think that I'm probably going to stay there long term. And so I arrived in Alaska in December of 2010 and got plugged into a church there and started my work. And I had heard some about the villages of Alaska, just that they were spiritually dark, many of them. And just with my nursing degree, that's an easy way to go in and just serve people in a tangible way. And so I started to look for opportunities to use my degree, and really I didn't come up with any ways to actually get out to the villages. I couldn't find any groups that were going. And, since my dad is a pilot, I've always considered getting my private pilot's license and decided maybe it's time for me to get my license and take myself out to the villages. And it was during that time that I actually had a schedule change. So at work, I worked 12-hour shifts on random days of the week. So about every other week, I would have to miss church just due to work. But I knew in the summer I was going to be switched to night shift, which would mean I could make it to church every week regardless. And that same week that that my schedule at work changed. My church decided to go to Wednesday night only services. That was the only service they provided during the week, which put me in the same predicament as before, and I was really frustrated about that and decided, I think I'm just going to switch churches for the summer just so that I can get that weekly fellowship. And so I switched to a church called Chapel by the Sea, and it was my second week there that I met Mark. And it was amazing to both of us to find that not only did we share the same faith, we also shared the same purpose, and that was missions. And at that point, he was already in the beginning stages of going with MARC and raising support to go with them. But we got married in January of 2012 and spent the next year and a half or so just waiting for me to finish my commitment with the Air Force, which I finished in December of 2013. And then our son was born a year ago, and we have another baby due in September. And with that, I'll say this. Often when we've talked about our testimonies, I often feel like I don't have a testimony. But it was it was the Lord's provision for me throughout my whole life to walk with him. And unlike Mark, I didn't feel from the beginning a specific call to missions, or even I'm going to Alaska to serve. But it's interesting to see how if you're faithful to walk with the Lord, he guides you, even though you may not know where he's guiding you. So anyway, with that, I'll let Mark finish and talk about what we're doing in Alaska. Okay.
Just another note, right after we met, our first outing together wasn't really officially a date. We met in church, and I felt like the appropriate thing after that was actually to go bar hopping. And I know you're thinking, what, a Christian guy, why would you do such a thing? I'm actually not talking about anything involving alcohol. I'm talking about something involving airplanes. We go out and we land on gravel bars, sandbars, in riverbeds, So that's the Alaska style of bar hopping. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Alaska. It's big. That actually, I was analyzing that picture, and it's actually a little off. Alaska's too small there. Alaska is actually more than twice the size of Texas. So it's a little off there. So there's some cool things. There's no snakes up there. It is the largest state, over 500,000 square miles, larger than all but 18 countries, sovereign countries. It's the least populated state, so not a lot of people up there. At least, let's see, persons per square mile, you can see Alaska 1.2, Washington 101.2. So you want to get away, you know where to go. We have our own time zone. And another thing is we eat roadkill. There's actually a list that you can get your name put on. And when somebody on the highway runs into a moose, typically the car doesn't survive either, but they're kind of big. But anyway, so when a moose gets hit, you get called, and you come in and you pick up the meat, and it fills your freezer or two, and so it's a neat way to provide for your family. Just go drive around the road and find a moose. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that we are without excuse. And I think Alaska really exemplifies this. It's a beautiful place, beautiful. But I call it rugged beauty. I kind of look at it as God being the same way. God is awesome, but he's also dangerous, right? He's powerful and unpredictable, not in a bad way. It's beautiful. Alaska is magnificent, but it's dangerous. It's got a lot of different things that can kill you. Most of them are big. So I'll just kind of give some pictures here. That's a ptarmigan. I think that was it. We're up on a mountaintop. That's probably about 5,000 feet. Kind of odd to find a bird up there. The bottom one is Denali National Park. Pictures don't really do it justice. Every time I show my pictures, I'm disappointed. This was actually in our backyard. This is when I was living in Anchorage, and the mother moose would come through and bring the babies through. And they're cute. Don't get too close because it won't end well. And if you spend much time outdoors, you're going to run into bears. It's just reality. So if you don't like bears, well, actually, I was going to say stay on the road system, but in Anchorage, the bears even walk through town sometimes, so it's no guarantees. Reindeer or caribou, they make some good, tasty sausage. Just a little bit of winter. Gets a little snowy and icy and cold. And these are some of the native kids. This is when I was doing a Bible camp. This is up north in what's called the Brooks Range. It's the northern mountain range. We did a Bible camp up there. That was actually the first year I was in Alaska. And that's actually what drew my heart to Alaska is getting out off the road system and just meeting the people. Now, it's a beautiful place. There's awesome people. But there's also some things that aren't so pretty. And that's just what the devil has done. Alaska's a spiritually dark place. And there's many factors in that. Not only is it spiritually dark, it's physically dark in the winters. In some places you don't see daylight certain times of the year. Maybe a haze, or the farther south in the state you get, and then maybe it's more like an evening in the winter months. And it's cold, and it's not just dark, but it's long. It's kind of interesting. At the beginning of winter, it's not that big a deal, just another, more snow. And then you notice towards the as you're looking forward towards spring, you just don't feel good. You don't have any energy. You just feel a little grumpy, and you're tired all the time, and it affects you, and it just it's hard to describe until you're there. It's easy to feel depressed. So those kind of things, coupled with the spiritual darkness there, is just really a playground for the devil. So that's why we're there. We're there to show and bring light into a dark world. And I share these things because it's a spiritual reality, not to there's suicide, alcohol, drug abuse, you name it. But I also want to put that in perspective a little bit. What's the difference between someone who is drugged down by the drugs, alcohol, and abuse, and the rich banker in New York? If they don't know Jesus, the result's the same, isn't it? So I don't want to get a mentality. I want to face the reality, but I also don't want to get a mentality that's offset and somehow thinking that the pain and the suffering that we go through in one place is different, that the need is greater necessarily than in one place than another. It's about where we're called. The advantage we have here in Alaska is that people don't want to live that way. It's easier to want to live in a rich neighborhood, but people don't want to live in this environment, right? You don't want your family to be broken. You don't want your family to be alcoholics. You want your family to be whole. So that's what we have as a tool, is we say, I don't have the answer. Christ is in me. I'm not the answer, but I can show you. I can show you where the peace comes from, where the mending of the family relationships come from. So the advantage we have in Alaska is that people see that there's a problem. And when you see that there's a problem, then you can look for a solution. Whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? How will they preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news of good things. We all have different roles. I'm not a preacher. I'm actually there just as I view myself as the hands and the feet. It says in verse 15, how will they preach unless they are sent? Well, in Alaska, if you're going to do ministry, you got to have some way to get from the road system hundreds of miles out into the villages. So my role is to be that mechanism for those people who are being sent, and that's airplanes. So there's some challenges in Alaska when you're dealing with airplanes, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a road system, terrain, and weather. The road system, there's a little bit there. 10 highways, it's about a fourth of the state. But when I say a fourth of the state, I'm not talking, full of roads. I'm talking a road here or there with hundreds of miles between. There's about 230 villages. Most of those are off the road system. So there's a lot of flying to be done, or a whole lot of walking. Just to give you perspective, if you look here, that goes all the way up north, but in reality, right about in here, it turns to gravel. So the real paved road system is all down here. So we're up in this area, Fairbanks, North Pole area. Anchorage is down here. And there's a Kenai Peninsula, there's some ministries out here. The organization Mark that we were with was in Soldotna. So as you can see, there's a lot of space there. A lot of empty territory. Oh, another thing, while there's not very many roads, there's also not a whole lot of cell service and internet. And actually, that's changed a little bit in the last few years. Some of the villages are actually getting cell service within the past few years. So things are a little behind up there. Your internet is through satellite. It's a very different world. So there's an issue of being connected with people. It's very difficult to be connected. So it's another reason we're there. Like I mentioned, we use airplanes because there's not many roads, so you get your fuel. It's either comes on a barge on a river or comes on an airplane. Got terrain and weather. If you're going to be in the air, you got to deal with what's in the air. And we've got mountains that are pretty high. Mount McKinley is over 20,000 feet. There's a lot of mountains that are 8, 9, anywhere ranging up to 15,000 feet. So when you're flying and you think, oh, I'm nice and I'm a mile in the air, there are mountains that are that high. So don't get too comfortable. The other thing you got to deal with, those mountains actually help create weather problems. It's like ripples in a stream. You see the water bubble up over rocks. Air does the same thing. So just because you're not aiming at the mountain, you fly over it, doesn't mean that the winds won't get you. There's some pretty high winds. The weather changes fast. Again, it's remote, so you get out in the middle of nowhere and you have a problem and you got to go down. You're hundreds of miles from anybody. And you hope that when you were going down, you were able to actually make radio contact, because there's no guarantees. Sometimes you can't talk to anybody. There's snowstorms and ice, icy runways, low temperatures, just a lot of challenges. That's that thermometer was at our house. Actually, it's 52 below. Nice, warm, and balmy there. So what do we do? How does that how do we work through that? Well, I've already mentioned, if you're going to do any ministry up there, you got to fly. You got to get there. You got to get other people there. What are we flying? Well, we're flying other missionaries. We're also flying work teams. During the summer, everything is 100 miles an hour, and then in the winter, not much is going on. But in the summer, there's a bunch of Bible camps, and you got to you go out in these villages and you pick these kids up and you fly them into these camps, and when they're done, you go out and you fly them all back home, and then you've got work teams that come up and they're doing work in the villages, repairing churches or schools or doing kids camps and things like that. So, you got hundreds of people coming in and out of the state. So there's a lot of flying to be done. And then if you got missionaries that are moving in or out, you got to go move them in or out. It's by air. You all load it in the airplane. Somebody needs a four-wheeler or a snow machine. You got to get it out there somehow. So that's why we fly. Now we're up north. We're in the Fairbanks area, and there's missionaries out in the villages. Well, if they're going to get supplies or need to come and go anywhere, they've got to come back to the road system. And so we're actually running a home that they can come in, and as they're in transition, they can stay at our home, go do their shopping, travel in and out. Work teams can come up. They can stay at our home before they go out to a village. And, it's just kind of a networking center and a base of operations. As I mentioned before, I'm also a mechanic. A lot of the missionaries have their own airplanes. I can work on the airplanes, which is always a needed skill there. And then encouragement. We rub shoulders with people as they come in and out. And as I mentioned, the villages are isolated. They're spiritually dark, and so people need encouragement. And that's another thing we're there for. Just to give an example of kind of what goes on, this is one of the towns or the villages that we went to help, and I'll show you a little bit what we were doing. Now, if you look, this is the Yukon River. There's a town in Galena here. This is about 15 miles. Every spring, all the winter, everything's been iced up and frozen and snow and everything. And then in the spring, everything melts, which is nice. Springtime's nice, but sometimes that causes problems. And as the rivers break up and the ice starts flowing down, you can actually see just the really sharp jog right there, and that causes problems. What you see there is flooding. And most of the villages are on the edges of rivers, and that creates problems because you're in very low-lying territory, and that's what you get. So my wife and I and another team, we went in there after this flood to go in and help rebuild. This is just a bridge that was knocked out. Now you see me standing down here. I'm kind of dark there, but I'm about 6 feet, so up to here, right here is probably about 12 feet. Well, that window right there, you see, that's this window, and that's the water line. So we went in there to help repair, just did some work. You can see the insulation's torn out in the walls and all the sheetrock and everything, and so you got to go in there and, you got to order materials. Well, that's heavy, and then you got to fly them out there or put them on a barge, and you start talking all the logistics that go on there. It's, you don't just run down to Lowe's and load up your pickup and drive back. It's not that easy. So it just takes a lot to get something done. And he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And how will they preach unless they are sent?" And then I said, "Here am I, send me." There is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of need, and but you got to get there. So that's what we're there for. Now this is there's a couple things here. We're kind of in transition. We were with one organization. We're in the midst of transitioning to another because we felt called to Fairbanks. This organization, Mark, was based in Soldotna, but which is kind of in the southwestern portion, but we felt called to go north. So this is what I was doing, have been doing, and our goal was to impact remote Alaska with the hope of Jesus Christ through missionary aviation. So our goal there was basically a support role. We were transporting people in and out of villages, Bible camps, things like that. We were supporting other missionaries. We were doing maintenance on their airplanes, doing some logistical work. We were doing training, flight training, things like that. And now we're transferring to Send International, or Send North, which is the northern region. And it might seem like a big change because their goal is church planting and discipleship. So that's a big difference, all this aviation stuff, and now you're doing church stuff. But actually, it really doesn't change anything for us. Because again, if you're gonna go to the villages, you gotta get there. So that's our role. So we're just as a support role with Send. That's what we're working on. And their goal is to mobilize God's people and engage the unreached in order to establish reproducing churches. Now, how do you do that? There's some cultural things there. You've got to relate to people. You got to realize when you go into a village, most everybody in that village is related. It's family. So you're talking years and years of history. So you walk in, you feel like an outsider, you are an outsider. Okay? You don't understand the history. And so there's just a lot of relationship that has to happen before you even try to do any ministry. You need to love the people. You need to know who they are. You need to know who you are. And then as you work in the community and you get involved and you be a part of people's lives, then that gives you opportunity to take the next step. People see that your life is different. Having your family there is a big witness, because there's a lot of brokenness. You come in and you have a strong family and you have children that love the Lord. That's a big testimony. To even be married can be a testimony. Then as you build these relationships, you want to disciple. That's what we're called to do, right? Go to all the world. Not preach to everybody. That wasn't the command. It was make disciples. There's a relationship there. It's not just, here's a Bible, have fun, read it, maybe you'll learn something. It's disciple. It's a relationship. And then as you disciple people, you train them up and you replicate so that they can go and they can share what God's done in their life and they can disciple. Now, we've talked about reaching unreached people. There's about 90 different communities in Alaska that don't really have any sort of presence, church, missions, anything. There's other communities that do have a presence, but doesn't mean it's very strong. So there's still a lot of need there. So that's why we're there. Now, we live in North Pole. You can see that little red star there. We were working out of Soldotna here. That was where I was based. And you can kind of see Fairbanks is the northernmost city on the road system, really. So it makes a good place to base. If you draw a line out to here, there's there's the Alaska Range here. Most of the mission organizations in Alaska are below this line. I don't mean missionaries, but just mission bases. So it's important for us to be above that, to be in Fairbanks. Because when we're talking about unreached communities, a significant portion of them are farther north. And I can understand why there's not as many people north, because it's cold, it's dark. I mean, you're talking out in the villages, interior Alaska, sometimes you're talking 70 below. And not much works when it's 70 below. They use heating oil, a lot of them. That just becomes like a wax. It's like a gel in that when the temperatures are that low. You got to put additives. Maybe you got to take a torch and warm it up. And you go to open your car door and it's the plastic handle and you pull it and it's so cold and brittle it breaks. Your cars don't start because anyway, it's a different world. At 67, 70 below, you walk out with skin exposed, it's going to be frostbite. I haven't experienced that. I've only experienced the 50 below. And that gets uncomfortable pretty quickly. You know, you feel like your little twitch in your eye, like something's start trying to freeze, and it's not fun. But as long as you're prepared, you can deal with it. That's a big thing. Everything, you know, just walking outside the door, you got to think a little more. Put on a few extra layers and plan ahead. So there's a lot more planning that goes on to things you do up there. So that's where we're at and a little bit of what we're doing. Well, what can you do? How can you be involved? Prayer. First and foremost, prayer. Again, it's a dark place up there, spiritually dark. When I say spiritually dark, I don't know how to express that enough. You know, generally in our American culture, we don't really like to think about demons and things like that. Up there, it's a reality. You know, there are physical manifestations. And that's not odd. So it is a dark place, and we need prayer. You can partner with people. You know, find a missionary. Be an encouragement to them. Pray for them specifically. Pray for us. There's a lot of need for encouragement. Participate. I mentioned before, there's a lot of work teams that come up. People, you know, doing construction on people's homes and doing kids camps, and you know, there's sports camps, there's Bible camps, there's a lot of opportunity. So if the Lord is speaking to you and on your heart, then maybe you're looking for a place you know to volunteer. You can come. You know, maybe some of the younger guys here want to volunteer to go be a counselor at one of the Bible camps. You know, there's a lot of opportunity. Just bring your bug repellent, because there's lots of mosquitoes. And when I mean lots of mosquitoes, I'm talking about clouds. I can remember one day I flew in, and I knew there were going to be mosquitoes. We were out on the riverbed, but we land and we roll up this hill, and I get out of the airplane, and I'm like, oh, it's not too bad. So I start walking down the hill. About halfway down the hill, a cloud coming, literally. So somebody comes to pick us up on a four-wheeler, and they go us down, and as we go, we're looking behind us, this little cloud following us. So we don't have snakes, but we have bugs. So there's a lot to be done there. There's, you know, did I mention there aren't very many roads? So it's important. I'll just let this summarize things up.
Hi, I'm Mark Ferris with Missionary Aviation Repair Center in Alaska, and I'm going to help you understand missionary aviation. Imagine for a moment we have two towns. One is a city, over here. The other is a small village, here. The two are separated by a large gorge, we'll say 200 feet. Now, with our modern day engineering, this is not a big deal. We'll just build a bridge. Now, what are we going to do with this bridge? Well, we're going to help out the village. So we'll carry some things across. So we can take cars, building supplies, medical supplies, food, whatever we need. But what if it's not 200 feet? What if it's 200 miles? Well, it's really not that big a deal either, right? In Alaska, we use airplanes. So again, we can carry building supplies, medical supplies, whatever we need. Well, with missionary aviation, we're not just taking building and medical supplies. We're taking pastors, missionaries, kids to and from Bible camps. So what we're really doing is carrying a cross. Missionary aviation is using aircraft to carry a cross.
Am I back on now? There we go. Hopefully that gives you a quick picture of why we're doing what we're doing. I'm sure you'll have questions. I have this is my blog. I actually have some other resources there. I have a list of, on one of my pages, of missionary organizations up there, missionary aviation organizations. And I also have a list of Bible camps. So if you're interested in being involved in a Bible camp up there, you can go on there. You can find our newsletters on there as well. So we have time for questions? No? Okay. Okay, all right, I'll be here after service. Okay. All right, well, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it. So.